Moving on to the next question. Which of the following works cannot be categorized under post-colonial theory? Is it nation and narration? Is it Orientalism? Is it discipline and punish? Or is it white mythologies, right? So just sort of looking at the options only, you can understand that perhaps discipline and punish cannot be, put into the post-colonial theory. But otherwise, you must, all these texts are important, you must at least know the names of the authors. So nation and narration is 𝐉𝐵𝐲, 𝐒𝐚𝐾 Orientalism, like I already said in one of the previous questions, is 𝐖𝐢𝐭𝐡. Discipline and punish is Foucault. And white mythology is Robert J.C. Young. Right? So all these four people, important philosophies. So the one that is not a post-colonial theory is discipline and punish. Right? Nation and narration, 𝐒𝐚K𝐫𝐲 talks of very important issues. So the idea of mimicry comes in here. The idea of liminality and liminal identities come in here. The idea of mimicry being mockery comes in here. The idea of hybridity also is being talked of in the same text. So nation and narration is a very important text. One of the essays from nation and narration is Science Taken for Wonders, which is again an important essay. Orientalism, like I already told you, the contrast between the self and the other. Right? The West is everything that the East can never be. Right? That idea. Discipline and punish is a different text. White mythologies again. Young talks about the relevance of the history that has always been read by Western perspective, right? So what is the value of history that doesn't even have other perspectives, right? And history must always have other perspective, but history, as we've understood, is always of the powerful, right? So then moving on, C is your answer here, discipline and punish. Looking at the next question. Which of these plays by Shakespeare does not use cross-dressing as a device? Is it As You Like It? Is it Julius Caesar? Is it Cymbeline? Or is it Two Gentlemen of Verona? Right? So which of the text does not use? So only Julius Caesar does not use the device of cross-dressing. As You Like It, Rosalind was cross-dressed as a man, right? Then there was Imogen here, who dressed as a man, who dressed as a boy, right? It's usually going to be the woman who dresses as a man, right? And hardly a man who dresses as a woman. Two Gentlemen of Verona, Julia also dressed as a boy. So all these three texts uses the device of cross-dressing. Julius Caesar doesn't. The device of cross-dressing and the device of play within a play are two questions that are, so play within a play in Midsummer's Night Dream, play within a play in Hamlet. So these two questions are asked, and I've often seen these questions. So make sure that you know the plays in which cross-dressing is used as a device, and the plays in which play within a play device is also used. Okay, so moving on to the next question. Match the following authors with their works. So the list of authors is Alice Walker, Ralph Ellison, Richard Wright, Zora Neale Hurston, right? There should be a space between all these. So Zora Neale Hurston. And the list of works include Invisible Man, Color Purple, Their Eyes Were Watching God, and Native Son. So all these authors here are American novelists. American novelists usually of color, right? So all these are American novelists. Another question from world literature, right? So now Alice Walker's very important text, extremely important, is Color Purple. Color Purple was an epistolary novel. Now, what is an epistolary novel? Epistolary novel is the one that is written in form of letters, right? Was set in rural Georgia and was written in 1982. Very important text. Must look at the text in detail, right? Then Ralph Ellison has written Invisible Man, right? It talks of, like the name suggests, it talks of identity and the idea of being invisible because of that kind of discrimination that exists. Okay. Richard's Wright text is known as The Native Son. Important character here is Bigger Thomas, right? Who's an individual who's living in utter poverty, and it talks about the criminalization that blacks often tend to, even if they don't want to, often tends to enter the criminal path, right? And Zora Neale Hurston, Their Eyes Were Watching God, 1937 text. So year is also important for these, at least these ones. The Native Son is going to be 1940. and Invisible Man is 1952. Right, so your answer here becomes A. Moving on, the next question is, an epistle to 𝐒𝐻 presents portraits of the following contemporary individuals. Was it Addison and Lord Hervey? Was it Dryden and Rochester? Was it Swift and Steele? Or was it Smollett and Defoe? Right? So, an epistle to Dr. 𝐒𝐻 is a text written by Alexander Pope. Right? Alexander Pope has written the text, and it's a 1735 text, and he does use two figures. So there is the figure of Atticus. There are usually more than the figures that are used are multiple, but the ones that are correspond to historical figures are two. So there is Atticus and there is Sporus. Atticus is Addison, right? And Sporus, as you can already figure out now, is Lord Hervey. So Atticus, he says, has talent, but has wasted the talent because of a lot of fear that is in this person's mind. And then there is the Sporus, who's sexually perverse, right? So the figures that are being talked of are Addison and Lord Hervey. Moving on to the next question. In the defense of poesy, what did Sidney attribute to poetry? A magical power whereby poetry plays tricks on the reader? A divine power whereby poetry transmits a message from God to the reader? A moral power whereby poetry encourages the reader to evaluate virtuous models? Or D, is it a realistic power that cannot be made to seem like mere illusion or trick? So the defense of poetry, also known as an apology for poetry, it was written in 1579 and also was published after Sidney's death. So it's an important question. It was published posthumously, right? So if you know anything about the text, you would know that it's a sort of response to Stephen Gousson's The School of Abuse. Right? It's a response to that, and it's a response by saying that poetry is not a school of abuse. It's other things, right? So if you know just this much, you would know it won't be the kind that plays tricks on the minds of reader, or it's an illusion or trickery. So it either has to be something that conveys the message. So you've crossed A and D, and so there are two options left that you can now think of as the correct option. And the correct option here is a moral power whereby poetry encourages the reader to evaluate virtuous models. So he says it's not school for abuse. In fact, it gives you the greatest moral truth about the civilization, the greatest truth about civilization. So it might not be talking about historical events, but its treatment of historical events. It might not be talking about the sequence of the events that happened in the war, but it does talk about why the war happened and what was the inclinations in the mind of humans when the war was happening. So it does give you an insight into civilization, and thus makes you aware and gives you a certain amount of moral power where you can reevaluate your actions and understand that if my inclinations are towards this direction, this is where I could be leading to. Right? So moving on to the next question. Samuel Pepys kept his diary from 1660 to 1669, 1649 to 1660, 1662 to 1689, 1660 to 1689. Right? So this is the time where diary narratives were important. People had started keeping diaries, and his is important because it gives an important account of London in 1660s. Right? So a hint that I've already given you. And then there are two important events, certain important events that are covered in his diary. So these events include the Great Plague. Then there is the Second Dutch War. And then there is also the Great Fire of London. Right? So it's an account, the kind of account that he's writing, but the account tends to give you important insights into three historic events also. Right? So the diary was maintained between 1660 to 1669. It's a factual question, but an important question. And this is also an important fact. So the events that you're aware of through the diary is an important question, and the time span between which the diary was maintained. Moving on to the next question. Arrange the following works in order in which they appear. Identify the correct order. So the works that are given are No Longer at Ease, Things Fall Apart, A Man of Power, and fourth one is the Arrow of God. All these texts are by Chinua Achebe. An important, very important author, right? Things Fall Apart is usually in all the syllabuses that I've seen for BA Honours English. Things Fall Apart does feature there, right? So it's an important text. Now you need to arrange these texts in chronological order. For his summaries I understand his texts are a little complicated because there are a lot of characters and the names of the characters are also difficult to remember. But you must look at the summaries also in somewhat detail because he's an important author for us, right? So there is the 1958 Things Fall Apart. Then there is the 1960 No Longer at Ease. This is the first, this is the second. Then there is Arrow of God in 1964. Then there is Man of People in 1966. And then there is the Anthills of Savannah, which is also an important text, which is in 1987, right? So this is the chronological order of all his important work, right? So the answer here is going to be D. D is your answer, right? Chinua Achebe has also written a work of critical, he's also written a critical work. It's called The Image of Africa, which is a critique of Conrad's Heart of Darkness, right? And it talks of the racism in Conrad's Heart of Darkness. So that's also an important text. You must look at the summary of the text, in fact, in detail. Moving on to the next question. John Dryden in his heroic tragedy, All for Love, takes the story of Shakespeare's Troilus and Cressida, Merchant of Venice, Antony and Cleopatra, measure for measure. Right? It's an easy question, a question that's featured in a couple of nets back in the day. Right? So the answer here, it's a heroic drama, it's a heroic tragedy, and it's taken from Antony and Cleopatra. Now another fact here is G.B. Shaw. Right? Your important playwright who's written plays like Pygmalion and Arms and the Man. He's also written a play that was inspired by Antony and Cleopatra called Caesar and Cleopatra. Right? So this question is asked a lot of times, and the All for Love takes the story of Shakespeare's Antony and Cleopatra. Right? Now moving on to the next question. Which of the following modern poems employs ottava rima? Is it Among School Children? Is it in Praise of Limestone? Is it Wild Swans at Cooley? Or is it The Shield of Achilles? Right? So the answer here, and this could be a question, so what is ottava rima? Again, this one also, Sir Thomas Wyatt. Right? So you're along with Earl of Surrey was important in sort of creating ottava rima structure as we now understand it. So what is ottava rima? It's 8 lines, 8 rhyming lines of 11 syllables. Right? And it's being used in Among School Children. So these kind of questions are also important. They can be asked. Among School Children, a poem by W.B. Yeats. Right? It's a question that could be asked. Questions like these are often asked, and you must sort of understand, sort of remember. It's a remembering fact, and I know that, but you must look at these things also, right? Then moving on. Now this ends our series of 18 questions today. These were important questions. I tried and take these questions from criticism more this time, right? And there were other facts and world literature also that was covered. So if you enjoyed the video, if you think that was useful, we're going to keep posting videos of the questions that are going to be important for the exam, right? Thank you.